Hello, everybody. I'm Alex, and welcome to the B-Side, a place where we strive to look beyond the hits and inform you of the music that you might be missing out on. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about the a cappella group sensations Pentatonix. Before we get started, a little bit of personal background as far as my own knowledge of Pentatonix. I've been aware of Pentatonix not quite since from the beginning, but pretty close to it. I knew of them as early as I would say 2013-ish, when they were dropping the PTX Volume 2 EP. And I was a huge fan of theirs around 2014, 2015, give or take. I kind of fell out of it, though, after a while. Just kind of, you just lose interest as time goes on. However, my interest has been renewed as of late, in part because of a book project that I have, and you can buy it down below. Links in the description. Pentatonix the Music is the name. Available on Amazon in ebook and paperback format. So as far as how Pentatonix were formed, it's a pretty famous story at this point, but just for quick recap's sake, Scott, Kirsten, and Mitch meet in Arlington, Texas. They went to high school together. Scott hears about the sing-off, and as a result, the three of them decide to try and recruit a couple of other members to join the party so that they can have a better shot of winning. Scott hears about Avi Kaplan from a mutual friend, and the band finds Kevin Olusala through YouTube. He had a cello boxing video that went absolutely viral. I think a few 100,000 views or something like that. So they got Kevin recruited from Georgia, I believe. However, the five of them didn't meet until the day before the sing-off. And that was kind of the big draw to them, is that they were the underdogs. They had only been together for literally days, and now all of a sudden they were trying to win this whole competition, which they did. I don't think the performances from the sing-off necessarily stand out as great compared to the rest of the catalog, but there are some strong moments. Dog Days Are Over, Video Killed the Radio Star are a couple of famous ones. I'm very partial to their performance of Let's Get It On, the Marvin Gaye cover. I thought that was just absolutely smooth on all fronts. But as everybody knows, the band won the competition. They got the $100,000 and the Sony recording contract. Sony then kind of hitches them over to Madison Gate Records, kind of one of their smaller labels. And so the band begins working on their first EP, PTX Volume 1. This was released on June 26, 2012, and in many ways it's a formative release. There's not a ton of absolute standout material here as far as covers go, and really as far as originals go too, though there are only two to speak of on this record. But while this is in many respects a formative release, there is one big exception, and that's the Imogen Heap cover, Aha, which is one of the best things they've ever done, still potentially the most complex arrangement they've ever written. I mean, it's a great cover on every level, but really the main appeal to it is the arrangement, because they're just doing all sorts of things, and it's really complex. The rhythm is just very, very syncopated. As far as range goes, all four of them, not counting Kevin, they're all exploring in many ways kind of the limits of their ranges at various points throughout the song. Even Scott and some of the backing vocals, and then obviously Mitch's lead vocals, which are extraordinary. And in my personal opinion, I don't think he's ever bettered the studio performance, though obviously a lot of people disagree. Apart from that, though, this isn't a particular standout in the Pentatonix catalog. I'm not a huge fan of the Somebody That I Used to Know cover, for example. A bit bland, a bit too much like sing-off material. I would bet that was the first cover they recorded after the fact. I think Love You Long Time is a bit underrated, but apart from that, there's not a ton to write home about here. And after this, we have the first of now 4 Christmas releases from Pentatonix, PTX Xmas, released on November the 12th of 2012. This is the shortest Pentatonix album yet, only 6 songs on the original release, and you can kind of tell that it suffers for it. The choice of material here is not particularly inspired, even as Christmas albums go. Carol of the Bells is nice. It's one of their better Christmas covers in my opinion, but apart from that, at least the original edition of the album doesn't have much to write home about. I suppose we could talk about Avi's lead vocal in O Come Emmanuel. I think that's really, really lovely. But apart from that, PTX Xmas is a bit patchy. It doesn't really feel like a step up from PTX Volume 1, a step forward in any sort of way, so it's not particularly essential. However, the important thing to note is that the band started releasing deluxe editions of their Christmas albums with this EP. And the reason I say that's worth noting is because the deluxe edition of this EP, which was released a year after the fact, as had been the case with all deluxe editions, this deluxe edition contains Go Tell It on the Mountain, which is extremely underrated in the Pentatonix canon and is worth a listen if you haven't checked it out already. It's one of their very best Christmas covers. It's a lot of fun. The gospel tinged vocals and Scott's soulful yelling and the choruses, it's just a lot of fun. So after a world tour, the band comes back a year later with PTX Volume 2, released on November the 5th, 2013. And this, in many ways, is their breakout EP, the one that transitioned them from sing-off starlets to legitimate forces in the a cappella world, and really the musical world, in a way. A lot of the reason why this EP is probably the best thing they've done yet has to do with the strength of the original material. In particular, the song Run to You is an absolute highlight of the catalog. In many ways, it's an extremely simplistic song, but at the same time, it's that simplicity that makes it work, because you have the 5 members just singing in unison and in harmony and in counterpoint with one another, and it just goes through these kind of various different moods, or various different figures, I guess you could say, while still maintaining this emotional resonance. It impacts you like no other Pentatonix cover really does, because of that simplicity. So I think it's wonderful. Of course, though, I can't really talk about this EP without mentioning the Daft Punk medley, which is obviously also one of the best things they've done, but also it's the track that got them their first Grammy, which was enormous in putting them on the map. In fact, for a number of years, it was the band's most viewed video on YouTube. It just absolutely blew up, and for good reason, considering that this EP was recorded in, various different locations, and the music video, I think, was recorded in a kitchen, supposedly. It sounds incredibly good, and the video is really cool looking, too. Really professionally done. And I think it's at this point where I really want to talk about Pentatonix's way with creating medleys, because while it doesn't always work, it usually does. Daft Punk is an excellent example of this, because they're able to just kind of take these songs and put them together and really make it seem as though they were meant to fit together, even if they weren't, which obviously in most cases they aren't. And maybe that type of thing is easier to do with an electronic group like Daft Punk, but at the same time, I think it's an impressive feat. I think all of the songs that they use in the medley, I think it's 5 songs, I can't remember off the top of my head, but they make it work so utterly fantastically. So it makes perfect sense why this track got the Grammy, and it absolutely deserved it. So after the success of PTX Volume 2, the band got signed to a bigger label in the Sony catalog, RCA Records, and as a result, the label decided to re-release the first 2 PTX Volume 1, PTX Volume 2 EPs in one collected package. That package, which I believe was only released in Japan, also contained a few bonus covers, such as Radioactive and a new recording of Let It Go, which it's okay. It's alright, but you're not missing that much by having not heard it. I do want to give a shout out, though, to the cover of Say Something by A Great Big World featuring Christina Aguilera, because that is an incredible cover and is extremely emotional in essentially every way. So it's worth a view if you have the time. And now we come to the EP, which I consider to be my personal favorite, PTX Volume 3, released on September the 23rd, 2014. This, to me anyways, is the strongest piece of material they've ever done. I don't think anything else really compares in terms of just how strong the covers are, how strong the originals are on here, how good the production is, how good the execution of the vocals is, everything. I just think it blends together so well on this EP, and they've never equaled it since, in my opinion. I could name every song here as a standout in some way, but to kind of pare it down a little bit, the track La La Latch is almost identical to Daft Punk in terms of quality. There's one bit in the middle where Scott's falsetto sounds bizarrely processed, which is probably the only negative thing I have to say about that track, because otherwise it's essentially a flawless mashup of two songs that are not by Sam Smith but feature Sam Smith. I don't know. It's a strange concept, but it works. The track See Through is billed as an original song, even though it really isn't, because it wasn't written by the band members in any way. But it was written by a trio, I believe, of European electronic music artists who I believe Mitch got in contact with them or something like that. And the result is probably Pentatonix's most underrated track, in large part because of the production. The production on here is absolutely godly. I'm pretty sure Ben Bram is still kind of the man in charge at this point. They've had other people deal with mixing and mastering over the years, but I think Bram's the one in charge of the production, and my God, he does a good job just with the vocals kind of coming in from like all different sides, you know. It really works magnificently, and I think Mitch turns in a beautiful vocal as well. Really, really top notch. And of course, I have to give a mention to the track Standing By, the closing number on here, because it's really beautiful. Avi turns in a lovely performance, absolutely ethereal vocal. And the arrangement on here is also extremely interesting because it was contributed by another sing-off competitor, I believe. They kind of contribute the backing vocal arrangement, particularly during the second verse and after that. And it's really interesting because it's a vocal style that Pentatonix doesn't attempt really ever, either before or after the fact, which is a large part of why it stands out, you know. And I don't know, I think it's excellent. And this entire EP is excellent. I could fangirl over this one a lot, which I can't really say for some of the later albums, so stay tuned. Just a little under a month later, on October 21st, the band releases That's Christmas to Me, which is the first full-length LP of material they've ever released, and also their second Christmas album to date. While I definitely don't prefer this album to PTX Volume 3, I do believe it has a lot of similar strengths, mainly because of the vitality that it possesses. I don't know, the band just sounds really energized during this period, the middle of 2014 and into early 2015. And it really shows on just so many of these songs. Even the slower numbers on here really, really stand out. The track Mary Did You Know has essentially become a modern Christmas classic in a way. I mean, you cannot step into a Walmart or a Target during the holiday season without hearing that song at least once. And for good reason. It's an excellent arrangement, bringing attention to a song that I don't think was extremely widely known in the mainstream until the band covered it. And people were aware of it for sure, but I don't think it had ever achieved that type of national prominence, particularly with the young, until Pentatonix covered it. And under any normal circumstances, Mary Did You Know would be the highlight of a Christmas album, but in this case, Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy exists. This was the track that won Pentatonix their second Grammy Award, and the arrangement here is very, very heavily inspired by classical music, obviously, particularly by the a cappella group, the Swingles, who are very notorious for covering classical music. And I think a lot of the reason why this works is because the band don't take themselves too seriously, but they also don't laugh the song off either. I think they treat the song with the respect it deserves without trying to sound ridiculously posh, if you see what I mean. It's quirky for sure, and you're not going to hear anything else like it on the album, nothing remotely close to it, but it worked. It got them a Grammy Award, and it got them even more attention and respect, which, you know, is that a bad thing ever? As with the previous releases, this album had a deluxe edition accompaniment released the following year, which I don't think is particularly great. I like the Joy to the World cover that's on there, but most of it is kind of insubstantial. The deluxe editions almost never turn out any sort of like great material. Go Tell It on the Mountain is kind of like the big exception, at least in my eyes. Now, I should mention at this point that I am going to be saying a little word about each of the members' solo projects whenever they release an album or an EP or something like that. And it's at this point where we introduce the first one, that being Kevin's EP, The Renegade, released on March the 6th, 2015. This EP is kind of interesting because it focuses on Kevin's cello playing a bit more than it focuses on his cello boxing or his just general beatboxing, which I think is a good thing because if I'm being perfectly honest, the cello boxing bit really kind of wears itself thin after a while. It kind of gets a bit uninteresting. And don't get me wrong, technically speaking, it's extremely impressive, but I don't know, man. It's to listen to it for an extended period of time. I don't I don't know. I don't care for it myself. I think this EP would have been quite a bit more interesting if Kevin had incorporated original material into it, but he doesn't. It's mostly just covers of popular songs with cello, beatboxing, and occasional other strings or other accompaniment. So, I don't know. It's a nice EP to have on in the background, but I wouldn't come back to this thing more than once personally. All right, and now we're coming to the point in Pentatonix's career that's probably the most unique period for them, and some people would argue their most fertile period from a creativity standpoint, though I'm not really sure that's the case. We'll find out. I'm, of course, talking about the self-titled album released on October the 16th of 2015. This is not only the band's second full-length album, their first, if you discount That's Christmas to Me, though I don't know why you would. It is also their first and, as of yet, only album to be focused on original material. All but one of the songs on the main album are original material written by the band members. And this is a kind of a gutsy decision in a way. I don't know how much was at stake here necessarily, but this is a band that previously had been pretty heavily focused on covers, and their original material had been a bit of a mixed bag, at least in my opinion, more good than bad at this point. But either way, I think it was an interesting step forward to release this type of album, and it was a good time for them to do it. And apart from the original material, the production itself has evolved noticeably. They're utilizing more multi-tracking in the vocals than they ever had before. The production sounds denser, a little bit less prominent, but at the same time, it's hard to say because I don't dislike this production change. I don't know if I prefer it necessarily. I still think PTX Volume 3 is their best produced record, generally speaking. But I think, again, this is a bit of an interesting twist. These kind of more choir-like backing vocals and the greater emphasis on foot stomps and hand claps and things like that. I like that generally. I just don't know if I prefer it to what came before. But now I mentioned the original material and how I applauded them for taking that step. Did it pan out? I don't know. I mean, I don't hate most of the songs on this record. I generally like, I would say, about half of them. But there are duds here. There are absolute duds. For every legitimately very good song on here, like Can't Sleep Love, which has an impeccable groove to it. I wouldn't want to call it super jazzy, but there is a bit of a lounge vibe to it. Avi's rolling bass line and Mitch's kind of sensual chorus vocals. I think it's a really good song. But for every track like that, you have something like Ref, which is a pile of garbage, in my opinion. I don't know. I'm sorry. I find that track extremely annoying. And then there's First Things First, which is just completely pointless and really should have been just stuck on as a bonus track, if at all. It doesn't serve any purpose at all. In fact, unfortunately, the cover, If I Ever Fall in Love, is quite possibly the best thing on the actual album. And notice I say the actual album, like the standard edition, because the best song on here overall is To the River. But the problem is, To the River is only included on the Target Deluxe edition of the album, the most exclusive edition out there. I don't know, I'm sorry. I don't understand how you let Target take total control over the best song here. And believe me, it is. It just feels the most complete. It feels like the strongest material generally in terms of structure, execution, everything. I feel happier when I listen to that song than anything else on this record, which is very strange, but I don't know. I guess that's the way it goes. As far as general songwriting critiques go here, I don't know. I feel like they're pulling a lot of tricks out of the hat, if you will, of pop music, which is understandable, I suppose, but it gets a bit dull at times, and it doesn't help that the lyricism on this album is nowhere to be found. There's cliches thrown all over the place. There's nothing profound being said here. It's kind of just, I don't want to say appealing to the lowest common denominator because maybe they genuinely think that these are passionate sentiments, but I don't. I think it's pretty stock fare that you can find essentially anywhere. But generally speaking, I still have some nostalgia for this record, though I will say this is, personally anyways, this is personally probably the last Pentatonix album that I would say I have personal nostalgia for, because then we start hitting a bit of a decline. And that decline starts with the band's third Christmas release, a Pentatonix Christmas, released October the 21st, 2016. As far as I'm concerned, the difference between this record and the previous ones is pretty apparent, mostly just because the band sounds very tired on most of the songs here. And I don't know if it's because the band legitimately did not care about the material on here or whether they were just very tired because they'd been touring pretty constantly at that point. But either way, this album is not particularly invigorating in any respect. The cover choices are pretty dull. The one exception is Coventry Carol, which is pretty obviously something obviously suggested in old English folk song, which no one talks about, so it's nice to see it get covered here. It's pretty easily the highlight. There are two original songs on here. As of now, the most recent two original songs the band have written and released, and they're both pretty bad. In fact, the Christmas sing-along, I would wager, is maybe the worst thing the band's ever done. I guess I just don't understand what that type of song is trying to appeal to and who it's trying to appeal to. Are you trying to appeal to kids here? Are you trying to appeal to your fan base? Are you trying to appeal to yourselves? I don't know. I don't know who this is trying to appeal to, but this is some of the most ridiculously basic and childish lyrics I've ever heard, and I sincerely hope that it's intentional, because if they're not trying to go for that sort of childish feel, I really don't know what to say. Yeah, I'm not impressed. Of course, there is one big exception on this record, which I have to name drop here because it's the band's most popular cover on YouTube now, I believe, and that is Hallelujah. The timing of this cover is very interesting in my opinion, because this was actually released the same day as the final album by the guy who wrote the song, Leonard Cohen, if you've ever heard of him. Cohen released his album You Want It Darker the same day that Pentatonix's video for Hallelujah dropped, and of course if you know anything about Leonard Cohen, you know that 3 weeks later, Cohen died. And at the same time, of course, Donald Trump was elected president in the United States, and during that time, there was a lot of attention being drawn to that specific song, Hallelujah, in part because of Cohen's death, in part because of the Trump election. Saturday Night Live, I believe that's who it was, SNL played that song live on their show as kind of a symbol of mourning in a way. So there was a lot of attention focused on that particular song, and look who are the beneficiaries of that, freaking Pentatonix out of all people. And I'm not saying they don't deserve it, because it's a very good cover, but it is just kind of interesting how the timing plays out on that. But yeah, apart from that, this record is not very good. And unfortunately, it gets worse, because then we go back to the EPs and we go back to the regular covers. Oh wait, no, there's a different component to this one, because now we're covering older songs. Enter PTX Volume 4 Classics, released April the 7th of 2017. This EP in large part rode off the success of the track Jolene, the cover of the Dolly Parton song, which is notable because it featured Dolly Parton as a guest vocalist, and obviously this track would go on to grant Pentatonix their third Grammy Award. Admittedly, it was kind of in a co-starring role with Parton, but either way, whatever, they got their third Grammy out of it, and the song got a lot of attention. And I don't think the cover is particularly interesting, just because the band kind of plays second fiddle to Dolly Parton, and Dolly Parton really can't do much anymore. She's not a particularly good singer these days, very breathy. But yeah, it's still probably a highlight of the record, which says a lot. The band still sound very tired, and these covers just don't have any vitality to them, in large part because I don't think the band really connects with the material that well. These are older songs. These are not songs from the generation of the band, you know. They don't have the same intimate connection that they would have with a Beyonce song or something like that, you know. Like, I listened to Mitch singing Take On Me, and I mean, he does it technically pretty well, but I'm not interested in what he's singing at all, because I don't think he is able to give that kind of energy that I think a song like Take On Me requires, because he doesn't really seem to connect with it that well. So it makes me wonder whether or not the classics, this oldies idea that this record kind of hinges upon, I wonder if that wasn't suggested by some elite in corporate rather than by the band themselves, but who knows. I certainly hope that the band members weren't responsible for the decision to cover Bohemian Rhapsody, a track that they claimed for years that they would never attempt to cover because it would be doing Queen a disservice. But lo and behold, they cover it here, and lo and behold, they do Queen a disservice because this is a terrible cover. I'm sorry. And the reason I'm criticizing this track is not because it does a poor job at replicating the vocals. In fact, I think the choir section in the middle is pretty well transcribed, all things considered, but it's everything else. I mean, the decision to give Mitch the lead vocals for almost the entire song is extremely questionable, and what's even more questionable is having Mitch sing the guitar lines, including the iconic guitar solo, which that is a moment in the cover that either makes you cringe or makes you laugh. It definitely does not excite you. I don't think it is physically capable of inducing that emotion in somebody. God, I have so many bad things to say about that cover, but I'm not going to say all of them now. You can read the book if you want to hear the rest of them. Now, at this point in time, the band had already been working on various solo material for a while. Apart from Kevin, who'd already released an EP, the other four members were all working on solo projects, or in the case of Mitch and Scott, a duo project under the name Superfruit. So the band were already kind of trying to go their own way creatively, which makes me wonder if there wasn't some sort of tension or fatigue, or like extreme fatigue going on at that time. But either way, it doesn't really come as a shock that just a month after the PTX Volume 4 release, Avi Kaplan announces publicly that he's leaving Pentatonix to pursue a solo career and also to spend more time with family. It's a decision that I had a lot of respect for at the time, and I still respect for a wide variety of reasons. However, the timing is also kind of interesting just because of the record that preceded it and the fact that the next record we're talking about is Avi's album, which was released just a month later, June the 9th, 2017. Avi has always had a very folk-centered taste. It's been, I believe it was the genre that he grew up with primarily, and unsurprisingly, this EP is exclusively a folk record, and a surprisingly decent one at that. I'm not going to say that Avi's next Father John Misty, because the sentiments that he's conveying are pretty generic, pretty sweet, a bit saccharine, but the vocals in many ways are the focus here. It is the atmosphere that's the focus, and Avi Kaplan is probably technically the best singer in the band, apart from maybe Mitch, but even then I'd be very hesitant to say that. I would say Avi's the best singer in the band, and he really shows it on this record. I do like the title track a lot, but I would have to say my favorite song is Quarter Past Four. I think that's a track that could hold up well on any folk album, really, not just a folk album made by the bass singer at Pentatonix. But yeah, this is a very strong EP and definitely worth your time. The next member to release a solo project is Kirsten, releasing her EP Love on July the 14th, 2017. But whereas Avi's album plays to his strengths and as a result is probably the best of the Pentatonix solo albums, Kirsten's album does not really play to her strengths, at least in my opinion, and is quite easily the worst of the solo albums. I've never pictured Kirsten as a pop singer. I've always thought her strengths lay in the musical theater realm, and this EP really tries to paint her as this pop diva, while also using productions a bit too reminiscent of acts like Imagine Dragons and Ex-Ambassadors. I like her vocals on this. I think vocally she can handle this type of atmosphere, but the songs themselves just operate on so many cliches. The track All Night, which I think was one of the early singles off this record, is absolutely terrible. One of the worst songs I've heard in a while. Lots of they're like pitch shifted vocals in this track, I believe, and the chorus again very reminiscent of like modern Imagine Dragons production, not even classic Imagine Dragons production. And just in generally, these songs are just very piss poor. I really don't recommend this EP to anyone unless you're like a Kirsten super fan who has to hear literally everything she's ever done. But even then, she has other tracks that are better. Just look on YouTube and you can find them. Her collaboration with Voctiv is really good. And then we have Superfruit releasing the full-length album Future Friends. It's actually an amalgamation of two EPs. One was released towards the end of June, and the other was released the day the actual album came out, September the 15th of 2017. This album kind of goes back to the discussion that we had about the song See Through, in that it showcases Mitch and Scott's affection for European electropop. And while I wouldn't say the execution is outstanding, these aren't really great songs or even particularly good songs that they're writing here. The hooks are pretty strong and it sounds like they're having fun. In particular, I like the song Deny You. I think that one holds up reasonably well, even if it's not, again, technically great. And I think Mitch and Scott's voices work really well together. In fact, I would say they sound better here than on any Pentatonix release because they're able to just mesh very, very well in octave unisons often. And in a lot of ways, I think that's what makes the choruses work so well because that's often how they approach them. The two vocalists will sing in octave unisons throughout the chorus. So I think this is a surprisingly strong release considering I've never been a huge fan of the Superfruit YouTube channel. So I would say it's worth a listen, especially for a Pentatonix fan. But anyways, yeah, while this is going on, Pentatonix don't have a bass singer. Avi plays his last show with the band in early September, and the band has auditions. They auditioned something like 45 different bass singers, I think it was, trying to find one particular person. And in the meantime, they're recording material for the Pentatonix Christmas Deluxe Edition, and as a result, they had to record a couple of songs without a bass singer entirely. They record one song with an a cappella Academy alumnus, Reno Selmser, I believe his name was, stepped in to sing bass there. But eventually they find one. They find one in the form of Berklee College of Music student Matt Sally, and they announce that in October. Matt contributes a couple of songs on the Pentatonix Christmas Deluxe Edition, but it's on the next, and as of now, the most recent Pentatonix release, where he really gets a focus. And I'm, of course, talking about PTX Presents Top Pop Volume 1. This album was released on April the 13th, 2018, and I kind of want to unpack the title a bit because the Volume 1 suffix obviously implies that they're going to be releasing more of these, which also implies, at least to me, that they're moving away from this originals-oriented direction that they were trying to go to in 2015. And I'm not saying I hate the move necessarily, but at the same time, I feel like that's a regression more than it is a progression, and it really makes me wonder whether the band is just kind of trying to play it safe these days and kind of just milk the cash cow a little bit instead of really trying to step forward and be innovative like I think a lot of people thought they were going to be around 2014 or 2015 or so. Well, either way, though, this is the best Pentatonix release in a little while, strictly because it plays to their strengths. It's modern, contemporary music, right in their wheelhouse, and all these covers, I don't think there's anything excellent on here, but they all get the job done. They're all full of a lot of Pentatonix trademark arrangement characteristics. And as far as Matt goes, he gets the job done on bass without being particularly standout. I don't think he does an outstanding job. He definitely doesn't do a bad job, though. He's very capable, an extremely capable replacement for Avi. But as much as I do applaud Matt and really this album in general for being consistent, the fact that there aren't very many standouts is a bit concerning to me. And again, makes me wonder whether or not we've seen the heights of Pentatonix and whether we're now kind of witnessing the band just kind of plateauing into what will eventually become a fade to obscurity. But I don't really want to talk about any sort of fade to obscurity right now because, as I'm sure people are very well aware, Pentatonix have a new holiday album coming out later this month. It is called Christmas is Here. It will be released on October 26th, and as of the recording of this video, I'm recording this video on Friday, they just dropped the new single today. It's not bad. It's pretty decent. I would say it's an upgrade on most of the material from the Pentatonix Christmas album, and it makes me very curious as to what to expect from this new release. So we shall see. But yeah, guys, apart from that, I think that kind of generally summarizes my thoughts on Pentatonix, the band. I think they're a band that certainly had a lot of potential and released some very strong material back, again, in around 2014, 2015 era. But in many ways, I think their popularity kind of gassed them in a way. And they've lost some energy in recent years, and now I think they're working on recuperating and trying to gather that energy again and hopefully, again, make further strides now with a new bass singer. And certainly, if nothing else, one can say that the impact that they've had on a cappella music is almost indescribable in terms of helping it get into the mainstream. And granted, they've built off of things that the Sing Off had kind of created before and that Pitch Perfect was creating even before that. But at the same time, Pentatonix were the first a cappella band that the average pop fan could look at in a photo and actually like identify. They were identifiable figures. They were noteworthy personalities. They were really a landmark band in the a cappella scene. And even though, as I said, obviously they've had their low points here and there, they seem to be gathering things back together a little bit now, and I'm really excited to see what they do in the future, as well as what Avi does in the future with his solo act, Avriel and the Sequoias. But yeah, guys, that basically does it for this video, and I want to end off by again advertising the full-length book that I wrote, which is no doubt a decent bit more eloquent than I have been in this video so far. It's called Pentatonix the Music. You can find it on Amazon, both as a Kindle ebook and as a paperback. And this book is up to date through Top Pop Volume 1. I don't know if I'm going to be updating it for the new Christmas album. However, if nothing else, I will certainly write up my thoughts on the new Christmas album and potentially include it as bonus downloadable content on Amazon. We shall see what happens, but I will let you guys know. And yeah, apart from that, thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for my next artist guide video. It will be on Ed Sheeran, another extremely relevant modern pop artist. So I hope you're excited for that. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun. So stay tuned. More content to come soon. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day. Later.